Hey there, Nick Jatakis here. In this video, we're going to bring in awareness to something that could be a little bit tricky to debug inside of a Dockerfile, and this is related to having a dangling backslash at the end of a run command. So I've got this Dockerfile over here, and someone posted a question in Docker's IRC channel a couple of days ago, and this is their exact Dockerfile. I did not create this. I copy-pasted it from their paste bin or gist or whatever it was. The only things I've done here are comment out these two lines as well as the entry point. This is because this is their Dockerfile sitting on their file system, and they're copying in files. I can't run an npm install here because the directory here just has a Dockerfile with no files. And I wanted to be able to build this image locally to see if I can reproduce the error that they had. So again, this is all their choices here for the Dockerfile. I kind of basically left it unedited. Okay, so let's try to build this Docker image and see what happens. So we can do a Docker image build here. We can tag it dangling, and then we're going to build it from the current directory. We're in the directory here with this Dockerfile. So let's see what happens when we let this thing rip. And we get this error here from Docker saying, load metadata for basically the test image sitting on the Docker Hub. We get an authorization failed error here. And if you look at the very last stage here, yep, this is from test as built. And, before we go a little bit more into detail here, high level overview with this Docker image here, there are a couple of different stages here. So we have the first base stage here, and then we have another base as dependency stage, and then we have another one for the test stage here, and then finally we have the build stage here. And this is pretty standard stuff with Docker. You can have a multi-stage build and then reference those stages like this from previous ones that you have named, and then you can also target them with build with using different arguments, etc. Maybe that will be a different video focus, but in this case here, what's happening is when Docker builds this image, it's actually trying to find this test image on the Docker Hub, and it's failing because we don't have permission to be able to pull that one down. But that isn't indicative of what this Dockerfile looks like, because in theory it should be using the multi-stage build test here, not trying to pull it from the Docker Hub. So that was what I noticed here when I pulled this down and built it locally. And at first sight, I thought well, I don't know, there's a lot of multi-stage builds going on here. I've actually never named a stage test in my life. So I thought maybe possibly test could have been a reserved keyword with Docker. So the first thing I did here is I'm well, maybe I'll just rename that stage to test2 and rerun the command here and see what happens. And no, we get the exact same error, but now it says test2. So that's pretty interesting. So, well, it's not interesting, that interesting. Okay, so if you want to make a stage named test, that's totally fine. It's not a reserved keyword. So then just as part of general debugging process, I try to at least isolate the thing down to what's having problem. So in this case, I actually commented out, this aspect of the Dockerfile here, seeing if the rest of the Docker image is going to build successfully here. So now it's going to run through this Dockerfile, and it's a little bit faster on my side than your side because I did I built this ahead of time just to make sure we don't have to wait and sit here for 5 minutes while, APK is installing things. But basically, it went through, we got a lot further than before. So it went through up to here to where it's installing the base dependencies. Then it's using APK here because this is an Alpine base here. Personally, I use Debian Slim, but that's not important here. But yeah, it's going through all this. It's installing all of these different APK packages here, right? It's installing bash and git and OpenSSH. And then we got this one APK error. Now, I'm not super well versed with Alpine. Normally I'm dealing with apt using a Debian-based system here, but this error is clear enough to know that it's unable to select packages. Basically, it can't find the package here, and now the order is a little bit weird here, but it says as dependencies from test. But if you look at the actual error here, it's trying to run an APK upgrade, and then it's adding, bash, git, OpenSSH, and then literally from dependencies as test. And this is basically the problem. So yeah, I don't know, you may have seen it, or you just looked at the video title or a thumbnail or something like that and noticed that, yeah, this freaking dangling backslash here in the run command is the whole entire problem. Because all of these commands here, they're executing inside of a Linux shell. And in a Linux shell, if you want to do something like, break up a long command into multiple lines, then you can end your line with a backslash. And essentially what happens here is, this line is basically being pulled up to here as if the backslash didn't exist and someone pasted in from dependencies as test. You can also use a backslash to escape certain characters, etc. Just to make that more clear, if we did this and put this on one line and got rid of the backslash, then you're doing the same thing, as far as I know, at least right from functionality point of view. So what's happening here is yeah, we have this dangling backslash here with the run command. So naturally it's okay, well, we're extending this current command that's going to run here and just pull these things up and try to do it. So it's literally trying to think that from dependencies as test is a name of a package to install. And yeah, the fix here is pretty easy, right? You just remove the dangling backslash and then rerun. and now it should run to completion. This actually may take a bit because I actually didn't run this one beforehand. This is one of those things where you may go down the rabbit hole of certain different things, and maybe it takes a little bit long to find a certain error like this. Honestly, this whole thing was resolved in a couple of minutes, so it wasn't too bad. But yeah, it was kind of an interesting one. I definitely didn't experience this ever while working with Docker since, like, I don't know, the end of 2014. So we're rolling up on something like 9 years of using Docker. So it's kind of neat to still run into encounters that I haven't seen yet. So I'm actually thankful that person posted that question in Docker's IRC channel. But you can see here, yeah, this image built successfully now just due to removing that backslash. By the way, there is a tool that I use a lot called Hadolint, and I've made at least a blog post about that one in the past. I think maybe a YouTube video. If so, I'll leave a card, a link to that one in the description. But yeah, so Hadolint will go and lint your Docker files for all sorts of different things. And I ran Hadolint, and if you use something like Flake 8 or whatever, inside of Python, it's very similar to that. Or if you're using something like Rubocop with Ruby, it just lets you know there's certain things that potentially might be wrong with your code, and it gives you suggestions on how to fix that, right? If you're using shell check, you can get all sorts of good information. And this is this for Docker. And I noticed that it didn't warn us about the dangling backslash here, which could have been something that I would have liked to see. Could be kind of an interesting little feature, but it's also a pretty tricky one too, because I mean, who's to say what we want here isn't what we want? But I did actually end up thinking about it for, I don't know, honestly, a couple of minutes just to see, like, is it actually possible to solve this with linting? So I made an issue here with Hadolint, like identify and warn you when run instructions have a dangling backslash. I simplified that person's Dockerfile into something like this, just so, we can reproduce the same problem here. There's the dangling backslash here, a little bit more minimized of a test here, but we do get the same exact error in the end. So I thought maybe a proposed solution could be if you are within a run command, like we are over here, and the line ends with a backslash, like let's say this one over here, and the next non-comment word in the file is a valid Docker instruction, then maybe we can produce a lint warning that you have a dangling backslash. So if you look at this specific example over here, we have the backslash followed by a couple of new lines here, but then the next real word there is from, which is over here. This is a valid Docker instruction. So maybe if this were, something else, like it doesn't need to be from, it could be a copy command, it could be CMD or an entry point or worked or whatever you want, right? It would detect that and then be like, hey, you have a dangling backslash. Now, as I mentioned here, I'll admit, right, I didn't think through this solution in great detail, but it does feel like maybe this is a solvable problem. Can we actually parse this in a way where it isn't producing false positives, at least maybe 99.9999% of the time it's good to go. I don't know. But I just opened up the issue not too long ago here. It's also on the weekend, so it's not like I expect people to reply immediately. It's also a very edge casey type of thing, but it would be cool to see if this is something that could make its way into Hadolint. It's a little bit above my pay grade to actually implement that parser because actually, nope, it's written in Haskell. So definitely above my pay grade. But yeah, if anyone wants to take that on or at least think about the problem, that'd be kind of cool. I'll leave a link to that in the description as well. But yeah, that's about it for this one. Sort of short, sort of interesting. And yeah, let me know if you've actually ever seen this error before, just due to having a dangling backslash. Because for me, again, 9 years with Docker, first time I've ever seen that one. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up because it really does help a lot. Thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you in the next video.